Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint by Sing Shong. Chapter 359. Forgotten People of the Scenario. Part 4. I swallowed my curses. If the fourth wall became thinner. There was a strange pain during the battle that I had forgotten. The cuts on my shin and arms were sore. My sweaty shirt was more uncomfortable and the heat of the forest made me dizzy. I would have exercised more if I knew this would happen. A spiked club flew towards my head. I rolled my body and avoided a goblin's attack. My joints creaked as I moved hastily. The goblin followed my avoidance path with the club like they were catching a mole. The fuzz on the back of my hand rose as blood stained the thorny club. It was obviously a smell I've encountered many times, but it was strange. The fourth wall has become very thin. The fourth wall is shaking dangerously. I jumped up from my position and corrected my sword posture. The two goblins lost their companion and were surrounding me with red eyes. At any time, they would rush forward and kill me. The moment I read this desire, the fear of death came to me. Beyond the thinning fourth wall, the emotions I had ignored were gushing out. The story I looked at was actually something like this. I controlled my trembling breaths. I had to fight. I could fight. All my companions fought through this fear. I was the only one who cowardly avoided the pain using the wall. Kim Dokja held unbroken faith with trembling hands. Let's think. How could I hurt the goblins with my current body? Skills couldn't be used, but stigmas were still available. The level was reset, but it was possible to use stigmas. The problem was how to apply the stigma. I saw the approaching goblin and cast Song of the Sword. This isn't your stigma. The effect of the stigma is fixed to the minimum. The second day. Sunny. I went out early and checked the weapons. Unbroken faith emitted a faint sheen and returned to its original state. It would have been nice if a fire arrow emerged, shit. It was comforting to feel that my sword was a bit lighter. Heek? The goblin laughed at my resistance and swung its thorny club. The club hit the sword and my wrist seemed to break. The goblins looked sloppy, but they were more powerful than humans. They were monsters optimized for survival on this island. Then the second club flew towards my waist. It was too late to block it with my sword. I swung my feet and kicked the club. There was the sensation of thorns piercing the soles of my feet. I bit my lips from the terrible pain. The angry goblins cried out at the smell of blood. If the stigma couldn't be used, then I had to try the second method. The giant-storied demon world spring is responding to your will. On this island, skills were sealed and the proficiency of the stigmas was reset. This didn't mean there was no power available. The giant-storied torch that swallowed the myth is responding to your will. Something existed even in the first generation without magic circles. It was stories. Currently, you can't exercise control over these stories with your power. Your stories are rejecting your domination. The problem was that my strength was drastically reduced and the stories didn't listen to me. The giant-storied demon world spring is looking at you with regret. The giant-storied torch that swallowed the myth covets your weakened body. Blood rose inside me because of the heat. The goblins momentarily shrank back from the power of the stories felt from me, but they soon recovered their momentum and rushed forward. The stigma was blocked and the stories didn't listen to me. I gritted my teeth as I watched the incoming goblins. In the end, there was only the last method. I hadn't wanted to use this if possible. It happened the moment I firmed up my heart and raised my magic power. A dagger flew through the bush and pierced the goblin's head. The goblin collapsed in front of me. The blade headed towards the other goblin's neck with fantastic swordplay. I watched the girl's ponytail flying and sighed with relief. Ajashi, are you okay? The mud-covered Lee Jihye turned her head and stared at me. In fact, the use of Song of the Sword wasn't just to confront the goblins. Like the system message stated, Song of the Sword wasn't my stigma. If I used this stigma, the master of it would surely become aware of my existence. Phew, I'm glad it is a juicy. Lee Jihye washed her face in the stream. Lee Jihye had also experienced a considerable degree of hardship. What the hell is this place? Skills and stigmas are all useless. I would have died if I hadn't received training from Grandfather Kyrios. Are you injured? No. I hid well. By the way, what's wrong with you? It just happened. I was placing the cut medicine received from Lee Jihye on my wounds. I couldn't believe I was injured this much fighting the goblins. I couldn't guess how hard it would be in the future. Lee Jihye watched me and grabbed the cut medicine like she was frustrated. Give it to me. You can't apply it to your back. Lee Jihye placed the cut medicine on my wounds. Be gentle. I might die if you press hard against it. Don't be a crybaby. By the way, were you this small? My muscle mass was just reduced a bit. Your shoulders look similar to mine? My pride was hurt, so I took back the cut medicine. No, I tried to take it back, but failed. It was because Lee Jihye was more powerful than me. Lee Jihye spoke in warning, if you move, your shoulder will break. It had been a long time since I felt so helpless. Now, it's all done. The effect of Lee Jihye's cut medicine was quite good despite the probability of the first generation. It wasn't dramatic, but the wounds covered by the cut medicine were healing quickly. There were magic and martial arts even in the first generation. Lee Jihye and I continued to walk through the forest after taking care of my wounds. Fortunately, night was coming. Lee Jihye measured the smoke rising from the center of the island. It seems we will have to camp here today? I nodded. We can move all night, but nighttime skills weren't available and we could meet enemies that were much worse than the goblins. The night of the island has come. At night, some of the system's functions are restored. The Dakibi bag feature is now available. I immediately opened the Dakibi bag and bought a few necessary items. There was portable accommodation for 2 people and safety devices for securing the perimeter. There were also recovery items, just in case. Lee Jihye received the items from me and blinked. What? You could buy something like this in the first generation? In the end, the coin usage scenarios remain the same. Whether it was the first generation, second generation, or third generation, the essence of the scenario was money. Thus, it was obvious that the use of the Dakibi bag would be granted. Lee Jihye was setting up the tent and looked at me like I was pathetic. Ajusi, I heard you've been to the army. Why don't you know how to set up a tent? It has been a long time since I was discharged. Why are you so good at it? I was in the Scouts when I was an elementary school student. Come to think of it, there was that setting for Lee Jihye. Lee Jihye watched me struggle from the strength reduction penalty and set up my tent for me. Night in the forest was cold. We gathered the surrounding twigs and lit a fire. In front of the blazing bonfire, Lee Jihye and I were immersed in our own thoughts. I wasn't using Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, but I could see that Lee Jihye wanted to say something. I patiently waited. Lee Jihye threw a dried branch onto the burning flames and finally raised her courage. Ajusi, can I ask you something? Ask. When did that novel start? I thought this question would come out. I decided to answer honestly. More than 10 years ago. My memories were a bit dim, but I hadn't forgotten what happened in the days when I first clicked on Ways of Survival. How do I appear in the novel? The question was normal. I would also be curious if I was in Lee Jihye's shoes. I took my time to recall the description of Lee Jihye. Admiral Lee Jihye. The girl who pulled out her sword to protect her companions. Her pride was strong, but she was more affectionate than anyone else. Her heart was always revealed on her face. I tried not to touch on Lee Jihye's wounds as much as possible as I carefully chose the details to tell her. Lee Jihye had a suspicious look on her face as she opened her mouth. It's so good that I feel bad. There was that much detail? The novel is a bit long. Even so. Oh, how do you remember all the details? I read it a lot. Still, to remember it so meticulously. I feel bad. This was my only answer. I was a middle school student at the time and my only hobby was reading the novel. Ajusi was a middle school student? Puhahat, then you were younger than me when you first read it? That's ridiculous. Everyone was 15 years old once. The constellation Abyssal Black Flame Dragon is raising his head. Lee Jihye laughed like she heard something interesting. That's right. I was also 15 once. Lee Jihye looked down at her sheath with nostalgic eyes. A small keyring was hanging from the sheath. I read Ways of Survival, so I naturally knew the identity of the keyring. Are you okay? Do you know about this keyring? A little bit. There is nothing private. The keyring Lee Jihye always carried with her was given by her friend who died in the first scenario. The sentences of Ways of Survival passed through my mind. Jihye. Kill me. It's okay. Lee Jihye was the wounded sword demon. Even if her characterization changed one day, this face wouldn't change. Lee Jihye was a person who never forgot the sins she committed. Do you know what happens to me at the end of the novel? Lee Jihye's words caused a story I had long forgotten to appear in my mind. I knew the ending of Ways of Survival. Jingle. Then a bell ringing entered my ears. It was a sound from the safety device I placed beforehand. The sound of the bell soon continued in a horror-like rhythm, as if to rip off my ears. Jingle. 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 Ajusi. Something was coming this way. It wasn't a goblin or orc based on the interval of the ringing. It was a much stronger monster. I gauged the direction of the rising smoke and said, "You will live to the end and be happy." It was the same in the novel. It was a lie. However, the novel was a lie in the first place. I lived so far to make my lies a reality. Run towards the village. I will buy time. I don't want to. Ajusi, you run away. Aren't you weaker than me? You can't deal with this monster. It isn't possible even if we join forces. Lee Jihye was only able to deal with goblins with her current abilities. I spoke calmly, go to the village quickly and get help. That way, both you and I can survive. You can move faster than me. But hurry. I have some way to avoid it. Really? Of course. Don't you know who I am? Lee Jihye nodded as if relieved. Hold on for a while. I will bring back help. A few seconds after Lee Jihye disappeared, a giant green monster appeared in the forest. It was a monster over 3 meters with a terrifying atmosphere. Damn, it was a troll, not an orc. I was lying when I said there was a way to avoid it. The entire party couldn't cope with this troll. It would be good if they weren't wiped out. Grr. The troll found me and revealed horrible teeth as it laughed. The troll's iron club was covered with fragments of the constellations, as if it had already broken the heads of numerous constellations. I smiled bitterly and gripped the sword. I would probably die from just one hit of that club. At least, if there was no one to help me. Grr. In the first place, this island was impossible to attack in a normal way. As always, there were hidden pieces in impossible scenarios. It was time for them to show up, according to the original novel. The moment the troll's growl soared into the sound, a piercing sound was heard. A familiar blade was piercing the belly of the troll. It was Lee Jihye. I knew this would happen. You are a liar. The Admiral doesn't abandon her colleagues, even if it means dying. This operation was possible from the beginning because I believed in Lee Jihye. The angry troll drew out the sword and made a strange noise. The wound was restored in an instant. It threw the sword and Lee Jihye laughed from beside me. Let's die together, Ajusi. I saw the troll running towards us and laughed too. Lee Jihye wouldn't die. The history of her life would eventually save her. The moment the Trolls Club fell, a sound was heard from the forest. It came. A silver sword split apart the darkness. I watched carefully. The pure sword that wasn't an ether blade cut the fearsome troll's neck like a toy. The favorite themes of the first-generation Forgotten People are love, friendship, and romance. First Generation. One of the oldest stories in the Star Stream. The master of that story was talking. Sacrificing your lives for your colleagues? This is the first time in 381 years. I looked closer, and it wasn't only one person. There was no need to speak. They are such friends. Really, there are still good stories out there. The laughing voices spread out. Something was strange. This wasn't in the original novel. Then I saw the faces of those walking out of the darkness. It's been a long time. Has it only been 3 years in outside world time? Surprisingly, it was someone I already knew. Chapter 360. Forgotten People of the Scenario. Part 5. A handsome beard and thick eyebrows. The thick lips that showed a unique, upright personality. The man who appeared from the darkness was exactly the same as when I met him 3 years ago. Goryo's first sword? I didn't know we would meet in such a place, Kim Dokja. A constellation of the Korean peninsula, Cheokjeonyeong, was on Reincarnation Island. I was indebted to Cheokjeonyeong, from Dark Castle to the Demon King selection. I swallowed down my pleasure. Cheokjeonyeong was a good constellation, but his purpose here was unclear. It was time to look at the other person's purpose. It would be difficult if his purpose conflicted with me. I was worried because you haven't been sending any indirect messages. I have been refraining from broadcasting on the stream for a while. On closer examination, Cheokjeonyeong's entire body seemed much more refined than before. Something flashed in my mind. Did you come to the island before the start of the scenario? It's been 15 years already. 15 years? At this moment, a sentence of ways of survival rose. Reincarnation Island is located in the Dark Fault. It might be 3 years in Earth hour, but time within the Dark Fault was a few times faster. In fact, Kyrios and the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint had also been here. At present, the time density of this island was around 5 times that of Earth. The reason you are here. Cheokjeonyeong shook his head. It might be an outer god, but I still wasn't able to withstand it. There was a scene playing in my head. It was 3 years ago, the day when the 73rd Demon Realm was destroyed. Cheokjeonyeong lost his incarnation body while dealing with the disaster. The prideful Cheokjeonyeong was greatly shocked that there was such an existence in the world. Thus, it was even more amazing. The other constellations had their egos crumble at the mere sight of the disaster, while Cheokjeonyeong was still trying to tear down the disaster. Perhaps this was the theme of the constellation called Goryo's first sword. I felt that I had to train again from the very basics. This island is the perfect place for such training. Cheokjeonyeong spoke while looking at the people moving through the bushes in front. They had good mobility even in this hot and sticky forest. They were probably the forgotten people of this island. One of them noticed my gaze and walked over. You managed to survive. Usually, the constellations from the outside die in less than an hour. Apart from that monster Cheok over there. Thank you for your help. I am Kim Dokja. I deliberately didn't say my modifier. Among the first-generation Forgotten People, there were many people who considered the modifier to be pretentious. The man laughed as if he liked my answer. I have long forgotten my name. That is what everyone does when they're here. The man spoke and moved ahead. The Forgotten. They were those who forgot their names after numerous reincarnations. However, they didn't really forget their names. It was just that reminiscing on the past became too painful. An old scent was felt from the bodies of the Forgotten who were opening the path. A very strong, curved and hardened story. Lee Jihye whispered, "How are they so strong?" It was natural to be curious. The Forgotten People themselves didn't feel particularly great. Yet they used a single strike to kill the troll we struggled with. The quantity and quality of their stories seem better than us. No matter how good the stories, it is useless if they can't take advantage of it properly. Lee Jihye stared at me with questioning eyes. The moment I tried to speak, I was interrupted by Jihye. He's right. Even if there are 10 swords, humans could only hold 2 swords properly. Goryeo first sword. His body was a sword, his heart was a sword, his story was a sword. Lee Jihye looked down at her hands like she gained profound enlightenment. In the meantime, Jihye stared at me with a deep gaze. You have collected many great stories. You won't fall behind the top-rated constellations right now. You're overpraising me. By the way, you've accumulated too much in a short period of time. Do you know what state you are in right now? I closed my mouth. In these eyes, I was currently in a very precarious state. The giant story torch that swallowed the myth is aiming for your incarnation body. The story person who opposes the miracle is doubting your qualifications. The story one who killed an outer god is dissatisfied with you. It was the same in practice. I raised the giant stories wrong and almost had my life snatched away by the stories. If that happened, I would become the same as the constellations I met at the duet between good and evil. Don't forget. After an existence creates a story, the story creates an existence. I already knew. I came to this island knowing it. I will keep that in mind. Not long afterwards, we arrived at the village. You have arrived in the first safe zone. You have met the conditions to clear the main scenario of the 133rd small island. You have met the conditions to clear the hidden scenario. You have received additional compensation for killing a competitor. Additional compensation is being prepared. The village was peaceful. After passing through the main entrance, there was a lifestyle that revolved around a huge hearth in the center. It was different from city life. A stay-at-home woman in scruffy clothes was feeding a cow while a bearded man was doing laundry. There were also children who seemed younger than Gilyoung and Yusung. It was an incredibly rural village where the first-generation forgotten people lived. It is really amazing here. Yusanga SSI? Ah, sorry. Did I surprise you? It's fine. Is it okay to talk now? Yes, it is break time. The wall is also busy. For some reason, Yusanga's voice felt closer than usual. The fourth wall had become thinner, making her activities more convenient. This village is like a mural that many artisans painted over the years. I was inwardly amazed as I heard Yusanga trying to find the right words. It was apparently ordinary, but as Yusanga put it, the reality of this village was never ordinary. I might be a visitor, but I could tell by the sight of the residents living their lives as usual. They looked bored, as if they had seen this hundreds of thousands of times. Shit, I almost died. This crazy island, are they really orcs? I looked up at the true voices, and saw a group of constellations appearing at the opposite entrance of the village. I quickly looked at the faces of the group. Unfortunately, the faces of my party members couldn't be seen. Instead, I saw an unpleasant guy. Demon King eyes that see the forbidden is looking at you. The Demon King with fiery eyes in the shape of a black panther. He was one of those I saw when I visited the 1863rd round. The master of the 61st demon realm. Eyes that see the forbidden, Floros. He was the one who died from Yu Jonghyuk's fist in the 1863rd round. The Demon King followed me to this island. Floro stared this way with strange eyes, before turning his attention elsewhere. It was obvious even without reading his face. He probably judged that this wasn't a favorable place to fight. Jihye, standing next to me, would have surely noticed it. I glanced at Jihye beside me. What did you have to say? It's nothing. They were really strong and reliably shoulders. I was envious. Is this the end of the scenario? Hey, NPCs, guide me. The constellations entered and the village became a bit crowded. One of the residents frowned at the turmoil occurring everywhere and responded. This is the end of the small island. There is no sincerity in your words. Well, the scenarios are all created by the Dakibis. Now that there were no monsters, the constellations were regaining their spirit. The story weak against the strong and strong against the weak has started. The voices of the stories were flowing from the eyes of the constellations. As expected, Chiak Junyang was correct. There were no exceptions, whether they were constellations or incarnations. If we didn't live the stories properly, the stories would live instead of us. Are there no additional rewards here? Should we search through the houses? There might be some hidden pieces. The residents felt tired and replied in a voice that found the situation troublesome. There are no such things. The small island scenario is over. Those who want to go to the next scenario should enter the hearth in the center of the village. It is the portal. Some of the constellations frowned at the cold tone and Demon King Floros stepped forward. The NPCs are really noisy. It is up to us when we want to leave here. Perhaps he was looking for an opponent to go against as he suddenly raised his status. I have found a village like this. It isn't bad to rest for a while. Bring out some drinks and food. This body is very hungry. The violent words caused the other constellations to laugh. Lee Jihye frowned and came forward. Just wait. Perhaps there was no room for us to intervene in this fight. In fact, the villagers weren't fazed at all by the threat of the Demon King. The man washing his laundry yawned with boredom. NPC, always NPC. These days, the kids think of life as a game. An old man carrying a Korean A-frame said, "It is a strange fate today. I have no enthusiasm and passion." The woman feeding the cows also added some words. Spit. This is why I was against opening our island. No matter how urgent the need for coins, do I have to watch these snobs entering? It is better to raise a few cows. The flowing words were heard clearly. The situation headed in a strange direction and the constellations started to notice. Floros let out a roar. Why are these group of bugs? The little boy sucking candy in front of him said, "You are the bugs who haven't lived for 1,000 years." Floros' mouth dropped open. He was the one who reigned over the 64th demon realm and it was natural for him to react like this. It must be the first insult he had ever received. A wicked expression flashed across Floros' face. The scenario didn't tell me not to kill NPCs. The Demon King let out a powerful status. The moment he roared and revealed his fangs, all the residents of the village gazed at Floros in unison. The man doing the laundry. The woman placing food and water in the trough. The old man carrying the A-frame. It looked like the whole world froze. The constellation sensed the strange air and faltered. The same was true for Floros. He was a fairly keen demon king and must have noticed something weird. Perhaps he was thinking this way. What the hell are these guys? However, he couldn't back down here. His ego as a demon king wouldn't tolerate being suppressed by the inhabitants of a small village. In the end, Floros chose the one who looked the weakest. Die. Floros' claws aimed towards the little boy eating the candy. However, this was a completely wrong choice. He clenched his fists. Then the fist was there. Something exploded. The fragments of an incarnation body scattered through the air like fireworks. Floros' incarnation body lost his head and slowly sank to the ground. Eyes that see the forbidden has been eliminated from the scenario. The constellations witnessed the death of the Demon King in front of them and withdrew with a shudder. What? This? The residents showed little response to the astonishment of the constellations. It was a serene atmosphere, like no one was holding a funeral for the bug. The man started the laundry again and the woman gave water to a cow. The old man shook his head and cutting at a tree. The kid sucking the candy declared, "Get out of the way. I don't want to see you anymore." The pale incarnations and constellations fled through the portal. In any case, the small island scenario had ended. There was no reason to hesitate anymore. After disappearing through the portal, there were less than 10 constellations remaining. The huge story torch that swallowed the myth wants you to go to the next scenario. From the moment I faced this child, my giant stories reacted violently. Maybe they noticed something. I smiled bitterly and approached the child who killed the demon king. The giant story torch that swallowed the myth is threatening you. I didn't know that Floros would be so helpful. I was relieved to find what I had been looking for. The giant story torch that swallowed the myth declares that it will destroy your incarnation body if you keep approaching him. I ignored its words and continued forward. The swirling giant story was emitting threatening air currents. I was annoyed by the childish story who thought it was a provocation against him. What? Do you want to be like that guy? One invincible fist, you Hozung. You taught the breaking the sky sword saint and Kyrios. The expression of the child changed. The inhabitants of this place were all reincarnators. Their age couldn't be read from their appearance. The child in front of me was a reincarnator who had lived for at least 10,000 years. The child narrowed his eyes and asked me, "Who are you? What is your relationship with those children?" The giant story torch that swallowed the myth is revealing its teeth to the presence in front of you. There was another reason I came to Reincarnation Island. Based on the future battles with myth-grade constellations, I had to obtain something from this place. I swallowed the rising blood and spoke in a congested voice. One invincible fist, please teach me story control.